Today's episode is delivered to you in an audiobook format. Our focus today is the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This remarkable work distills decades of research by a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist into a deep exploration of how our minds process information, form judgments, and make decisions. Kahneman, alongside his late collaborator Amos Tversky, transformed our understanding of human rationality, revealing that beneath our conscious reasoning lies a landscape of cognitive shortcuts, biases, and intuitive leaps that shape our everyday thinking. In this narration, we'll delve into the core concepts of thinking, fast and slow, particularly the two-system model of cognition, before examining many of the pitfalls, heuristics, and illusions that characterize our mental life. Ultimately, this story about the limitations of our own thought processes becomes a powerful guide for making better decisions and understanding why others sometimes see the world so differently than we do. The first reason thinking fast and slow commands so much attention is that it upends the comforting notion that we're mostly rational actors who carefully weigh evidence and arrive at well-considered conclusions. Kahneman shows that in many situations, especially those involving uncertainty or complexity, we rely heavily on automatic judgments and mental shortcuts that can be surprisingly flawed. While these shortcuts often work well enough for daily life, they also lead to systematic errors, from overconfidence in our predictions to distorted judgments about risk and probability. Kahneman's insight is that these errors aren't random. They arise from built-in heuristics that once served our evolutionary purposes, but now lead us astray in contexts like financial planning, health decisions, or policymaking. The result is a humbling reminder that intellect alone can't protect us from biases if we're not actively aware of how our minds actually operate. Yet, the book also offers hope. By illuminating the workings of our cognitive machinery, Kahneman gives us tools to spot when we might be relying too heavily on snap judgments. He doesn't promise we can become perfectly rational. No one can fully purge cognitive biases, but suggests that an awareness of them can sometimes temper our worst errors. Moreover, Thinking Fast and Slow is written in a style that melds personal anecdotes, historical context, and experimental evidence, making it accessible to readers beyond psychology or economics. It's a masterclass in bridging rigorous science with everyday relevance. Whether you're interested in business, policy, self-improvement, or just the curiosities of the human mind, Kahneman's text offers a roadmap for understanding why we think the way we do, and how we might occasionally do better. At the heart of Thinking Fast and Slow is the distinction between two modes of thought that Kahneman calls System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, intuitive, and often emotional. It's the mode of thinking that reacts instantly when we see a car swerving toward us or interpret a facial expression without conscious effort. System 1 is always running in the background, generating impressions and feelings that help us navigate the world efficiently. Its operations feel effortless. When you see 2 plus 2 is equal, you instantly know the answer is 4 without going through a deliberate arithmetic process. Likewise, if someone asks you to form a mental image of your house, System 1 conjures it instantly. System 2, by contrast, is the slow, deliberate, analytical mode of thinking. It requires conscious effort and is activated when we face a novel problem that System 1 can't handle automatically, such as calculating 27x46 in our head or carefully weighing the pros and cons of a major life decision. Engaging System 2 feels like work. We notice it in the tension that arises when we concentrate on a tough puzzle or make sense of a dense text. Kahneman portrays System 2 as a resource-limited executive that can only handle a certain amount of mental effort at a time. If you try to do too many demanding tasks simultaneously, you'll quickly deplete the capacity of System 2, and you'll rely more on shortcuts or incomplete judgments. One of Kahneman's key observations is that System 1 and System 2 aren't just neutral tools. System 1's quick judgments can lead to illusions or biases, especially in unfamiliar or tricky situations, because it leaps to conclusions based on partial information or heuristic shortcuts. System 2, ideally, is supposed to monitor System 1's outputs and override them if they're clearly flawed. However, System 2 is lazy or costly, meaning it doesn't always intervene. Often we trust the ease and confidence of System 1, especially if we don't realize we're in a situation that demands more careful scrutiny. This dynamic explains why we can make snap judgments, like forming an opinion about someone's personality from a single brief encounter that might be riddled with error, yet still feel entirely certain. System 1, in essence, is a brilliant pattern matcher for many everyday scenarios, but prone to serious mistakes outside those familiar contexts. Kahneman gives us a range of examples to show System 1's power and its pitfalls. Consider the bat and ball problem, a classic demonstration. A bat and ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? System 1 often jumps to the answer 10 cents, which is incorrect. If you do the algebra, you discover the ball must cost 5 cents, and the bat 1.05. Yet the 10-cent solution feels intuitively right to many people, and they rarely bother to double-check. This small puzzle reveals how easily System 1 can produce an immediate but flawed result, and how System 2, if engaged, might correct it by doing a moment of careful reasoning. But in everyday life, we typically rely on that immediate feeling of correctness. This dynamic underpins much of Kahneman's analysis. We trust quick heuristics that work in many cases, but occasionally lead us astray in predictable ways. Another example involves the Linda problem. Linda is described as a bright, outspoken philosophy major deeply concerned with social justice. Which is more probable, that Linda is a bank teller, or that Linda is a bank teller who is active in the feminist movement? Most people pick the second option because it feels more consistent with Linda's personality. However, from a probability standpoint, a single event, being a bank teller, is always more likely than that event combined with another condition, also being a feminist activist. Kahneman and Tversky named this the conjunction fallacy. System 1 leaps to the story that bank teller plus feminist fits Linda's profile better, ignoring the fundamental rule that a subset can't be more probable than a superset. It's a perfect illustration of how our intuitive sense of coherence, or representativeness, trumps logic in certain scenarios. Such examples highlight the deeper theme. Rational consistency and evidence-based reasoning don't come naturally to us. In everyday life, we rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts that often do well but can systematically misfire. Beyond representativeness, Kahneman covers heuristics like availability, where people judge probability or frequency by how easily examples come to mind. For example, we might think shark attacks are more common than they actually are because they're heavily reported in the media, thus more available in memory. Another is anchoring. If you see a random number like 65, it can prime you unconsciously to guess a higher number for a subsequent question, even if the two are unrelated. These heuristics rarely appear in conscious thought. We just form judgments that feel right without noticing the subtle influences that shaped them. One of the largest sections of Thinking Fast and Slow explores the variety of cognitive biases that these heuristics produce. Kahneman makes it clear that calling them biases doesn't necessarily mean they're errors in everyday survival contexts. They likely evolved for quick decision-making under constraints. But in modern environments where we handle complex financial decisions or attempt to analyze uncertain risks, these biases can wreak havoc. Let's discuss a few in more detail. 1. Overconfidence. People often feel more certain about their judgments than the evidence warrants. We see it in everything from stock picking to political predictions. Kahneman calls it the illusion of validity, where individuals who have partial knowledge or a strong gut feeling assume they've arrived at a correct conclusion. Even experts, like financial analysts or political forecasters, can be shockingly inaccurate while maintaining high confidence. System 1 fosters overconfidence by spinning coherent narratives out of incomplete data, and System 2 often fails to step in and challenge that sense of certainty. 2. Hindsight bias. Once we know an outcome, we often believe that outcome was obvious or inevitable. "I knew it all along," we say. But if you measure predictions before the outcome is known, you'll see how uncertain the situation actually was. Hindsight bias emerges because our mind reconstructs events into a neat chain of cause and effect, ignoring the many ways it could have turned out differently. This leads us to overestimate how predictable events were and can distort learning from experience. 3. Base rate neglect. Suppose you're told a man loves poetry, is shy, and wears glasses. Is he more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? Many choose librarian because it fits the stereotype. But there may be far more farmers than librarians in the population, so the base rate might make it more probable. He's actually a farmer. People often ignore base rates, the prior probabilities of each category, and focus on how well the description matches a particular stereotype. System 1 leaps to the pattern match, overshadowing the cold math of population frequencies. 4. Loss aversion. Tied closely to Kahneman's pioneering work on prospect theory, loss aversion is the finding that people care more about avoiding losses than making gains of the same amount. For example, losing $100 feels more painful than the pleasure of gaining $100. This imbalance can distort decisions, causing people to pass up fair or even favorable gambles because they can't stomach the chance of losing. It also makes individuals hold on to losing stocks too long or avoid beneficial investments if there's a possibility of short-term dips. 5. Wisciety, what you see is all there is. Kahneman frequently notes that we rely heavily on whatever information is in front of us, acting as if that's the complete picture. We rarely pause to consider what information we might be missing. Thus, we might form strong impressions from minimal data, fail to investigate alternative hypotheses, or assume we have the whole truth when we only have a snippet. System 1 likes a coherent story, so it snatches up the data at hand and weaves a narrative, ignoring how partial or skewed that data might be. These biases form a tapestry that paints a sobering portrait of human cognition. Kahneman doesn't argue we're irrational in all matters. Obviously, we do many tasks exceptionally well. But he shows that in uncertain, complex, or atypical contexts, our mental apparatus frequently misfires in consistent ways. Our minds aren't designed for rigorous statistical thinking or for evaluating possibilities dispassionately. They're designed to find patterns quickly, glean approximate solutions, and deliver them with confidence. Kahneman also delves into what he and Tversky called prospect theory, which is often considered their crowning achievement in behavioral economics. Traditional economic theory assumed humans make decisions based on a stable utility function. We weigh outcomes rationally, weighting probable gains and losses by their probabilities. But real humans don't do this. We systematically overvalue losses compared to gains, loss aversion, show diminishing sensitivity. An extra $100 means more to you if you have little money than if you're already wealthy. And we weigh probabilities in a non-linear way, overemphasizing small chances while underemphasizing moderate or large chances. Prospect theory formalizes these deviations in a mathematical model that better predicts how people actually behave in gambling, insurance, or investment scenarios. One hallmark demonstration is that people prefer a sure $900 over a 90% chance to win $1,000, which has the same expected value, revealing risk aversion in gains. Yet for losses, people often prefer a 90% chance of losing $1,000 to a sure loss of $900, indicating risk-seeking in losses. This contradictory pattern, risk-averse for gains, risk-seeking for losses, is precisely explained by prospect theory. Kahneman shows how these tendencies shape everything from insurance purchases — people pay a premium to avoid the sure loss of a big expense — to the reluctance to cut one's losses in a failing investment. These patterns defy classic rational utility models but reflect the hidden logic of our intuitive psychology. Moreover, prospect theory clarifies a wide array of real-world puzzles. Why do people buy both lottery tickets, risk-seeking in small probability gains, and insurance, risk-averse in small probability losses? Why do minor changes in how choices are framed, like presenting survival rates versus mortality rates, flip preferences? The insights from prospect theory underscore that our judgments about value and probability are deeply shaped by reference points, framing, and perceived losses versus gains. This is a prime example of how thinking, fast and slow, merges psychological experiments with profound implications for economics and public policy. Another major theme is how illusions of understanding can arise even when chance plays a big role. Kahneman critiques the halo effect, where our positive impression of a person or brand in one domain colors our assessment in other domains. He also examines how we seek patterns in random data, attributing significance to streaks or clusters that are statistically inevitable. For instance, a basketball player making several shots in a row is labeled as having a hot hand, though many analyses show such streaks can often be explained by normal variance. Yet System 1 loves constructing a narrative about the player's momentum. Similarly, in finance, we might assume certain fund managers have exceptional skill if they outperform the market for a few years, failing to realize how many other managers with identical skill, or better, did not stand out purely due to chance. Kahneman calls it the illusion of skill, in contexts where randomness or luck is a huge factor. If you look at long-term data, it's rare that a fund manager consistently beats the market. Yet the media and the industry highlight those who do well in a short window, awarding them praise and new client money, ignoring that their performance may revert to the mean in subsequent years. This ties into overconfidence. We adopt a sense of narrative coherence around short-term success, attributing it to skill and ignoring the large role chance might have played. The deeper implication is that System 1's appetite for cause and effect stories can blind us to how large random fluctuations can be in life, from financial markets to career progress. All these heuristics and biases might paint a grim view of human rationality, but Kahneman nuances the picture by pointing out the many domains where System 1 is brilliant, such as basic perception, quick intuitive leaps in everyday tasks, or snap social judgments that are surprisingly accurate in routine contexts. The problem arises when we apply the same intuition to contexts that are statistically nuanced or structurally different from the environment in which we evolved. For everyday survival or typical interpersonal judgments, these heuristics are good enough. But for modern tasks, like analyzing the reliability of scientific data, managing complex projects, or understanding large-scale economic risks, they can fail catastrophically. Importantly, Kahneman doesn't advocate discarding intuition altogether. Rather, he invites us to become more aware of when we might be leaning on it too heavily. If we sense a problem is challenging or uncertain, or that important stakes are involved, we should muster System 2's energy to question initial judgments. We can ask ourselves, have I accounted for base rates? Am I overweighting recent or vivid examples? Am I being swayed by how the question is framed? Engaging System 2 is mentally tiring, but for high-stakes decisions, that added effort might be essential to avoid illusions. In a sense, thinking fast and slow is both a cautionary tale about trusting our gut in the wrong places and a user's manual for the mind, acknowledging the friction between intuitive brilliance and rational oversight. Kahneman also brings up the concept of econs versus humans, borrowed from Richard Thaler's work in behavioral economics. Classical economic theory describes econs, the hypothetical perfectly rational agents who weigh expected utilities and obey the axioms of rational choice. But real humans, us, display bounded rationality, emotion, habit, and confusion. Thinking, fast and slow, cements the notion that these two perspectives are not just mild deviations, they're fundamentally different mindsets. That shift in economic thought has major implications for everything from designing consumer protections to setting public policy. If people systematically misjudge risk or fall prey to heuristics, governments and organizations might want to nudge them toward better outcomes by presenting choices in ways that align more naturally with the real workings of the mind. The field of nudge policy, championed by Thaler and others, partially emerges from Kahneman's insights on how easy it is to lead people astray or help them do better, simply by changing how options are presented. Another noteworthy concept in Thinking Fast and Slow is the idea that happiness can be separated into an experiencing self and a remembering self. Kahneman conducted research showing that how we evaluate an event, say, a vacation, depends not only on the actual sum of pleasurable or painful moments, but also on how it ends in the peaks of the experience. The remembering self tells the story and weighs those final or peak moments heavily, whereas the experiencing self might have had a different day-to-day perspective. This dichotomy suggests that we can be misguided about what experiences we truly prefer, since the story we remember sometimes overrides the total sum of what we felt. For instance, a colonoscopy that ended on a less painful note might be recalled as less bad overall than a shorter procedure that ended abruptly in more pain, even if the latter had a briefer total painful duration. This phenomenon underscores the complexity of how we judge life events, merging psychology of memory with the illusions of coherence. One thread that runs throughout the book is how illusions of confidence and coherence hamper effective decision-making. We see illusions of validity in stock pickers, illusions of control in gamblers who think they can influence dice rolls by throwing them in specific ways, and illusions of knowledge in experts who claim predictive power far exceeding the reality. Kahneman systematically shows that many of these illusions are fed by System 1's unshakable belief in the stories it generates. Stories that make sense to us in the moment, but might crumble under deeper statistical or logical scrutiny. The remedy, Kahneman suggests, lies less in becoming some emotionless, super-rational agent, an impossible ideal, than in recognizing triggers for illusions and taking measured steps to correct them. For instance, we might rely more on algorithms or structured decision-making frameworks in certain professional contexts because consistent mechanical rules can outperform human judgment in tasks like credit evaluation or medical diagnoses, especially when the environment is noisy or pattern-laden. It's worth noting that Thinking Fast and Slow includes some personal reflection from Kahneman, referencing his collaborative journey with Amos Tversky. Tversky passed away in 1996, long before the Nobel Prize or the publication of this book, so Kahneman pays homage to how integral Tversky's brilliance was in shaping these theories. Their synergy laid the groundwork for an entire field that bridged psychology and economics, eventually morphing into what we now call behavioral economics. Their joint experiments, meticulously designing questions about probabilities, illusions, and logical traps, sparked a revolution in how researchers approach the study of decision-making. The book stands as a testament to that legacy, weaving a narrative of scientific discovery and personal anecdote around the raw findings on heuristics and biases. As we near the end, let's consider how we might apply Kahneman's lessons. On a personal level, the first step is recognizing when you're in a domain of high uncertainty or complexity. That's when you should slow down, question your gut, gather more information, or consult objective data. If you sense that you might be succumbing to the representativeness or availability heuristic, try to ask, what is the base rate here? Am I ignoring some broader context? Or if you notice you're anchor biased, fixated on an initial number or piece of data, try deliberately to consider a wide range of other values. Perhaps the biggest single takeaway is to accept that feeling certain doesn't guarantee being correct. Overconfidence is a hazard that rears its head, especially in predictions about the future or judgments of subjective risk. For organizations or policymakers, thinking fast and slow implies that if we want better outcomes, be it in safety, finance, or public health, we should design choice architectures that account for common biases. This might mean default options that are beneficial if people do nothing, or limiting the complexity of forms so System 2 doesn't get overwhelmed. We might also rely more on robust algorithms or statistical models in settings like hiring, college admissions, or complex diagnoses, and remain aware that professional intuition, while valuable, can be overshadowed by heuristics in many situations. The ultimate message is that we can steer behavior by acknowledging how people actually think, not how we wish they did. Finally, thinking fast and slow invites a measure of intellectual humility. If even the most educated, sophisticated minds can repeatedly fall for illusions of validity, then we should hold our convictions lightly, especially in domains where the environment is less predictable or random factors abound. Kahneman's motto, paraphrased, might be, trust your intuition in the right conditions, those that are stable and regular enough for quick pattern recognition to be reliable. But engage deliberation and caution in irregular, complex, or high-stakes scenarios. This is a far cry from simplistic endorsements of always trust your gut or always be rational. Rather, it's about diagnosing the context and applying the mental tool set that best fits. If you're inspired to integrate these insights into your own life, consider reflecting on a few daily decisions. Which ones do you typically make automatically, letting System 1 reign unchecked? Maybe it's diet choices, small financial outlays, or snap judgments about people. Try picking one domain where you suspect biases might creep in. Experiment with forcing yourself to think more carefully. gather additional data, consult a neutral third party, or write down potential pitfalls. Observe if your final decision changes, or if you notice illusions you hadn't spotted before. You might find, for instance, that your initial impulse in stock picking was anchored by a random figure you read in the news, or that your estimate of how many hours it'll take to do a household project is shaped by an unrealistic optimism bias. Through small intentional steps like these, you can incorporate the spirit of thinking fast and slow into your routine. One also might challenge peers or colleagues politely when they exhibit typical biases. If someone is crowing about how obvious it was that a certain stock would rise after the fact, you could mention hindsight bias. Or if a friend is sure they've discovered a pattern in lottery numbers, you might note that random sequences produce apparent patterns all the time. Of course, nobody likes a pedant who applies these lessons too abrasively, but a light or constructive reminder can help shift conversations toward a more mindful style. Over time, a collective awareness of biases can shape group decisions to be more robust, whether you're part of a corporate team evaluating proposals or a family deciding on major purchases. In conclusion, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman stands as one of the most influential books in understanding human cognition. It distills a lifetime of research into two systems of thought, one fast, one slow, and elaborates on a range of heuristics and biases that systematically color our judgments. Kahneman's writing is both an academic contribution and a practical guide, revealing how illusions of confidence, misjudged probabilities, flawed risk assessments, and subtle frames can lead us into error. At the same time, his tone is balanced, recognizing that the intuition of System 1 is indispensable for daily life, and that System 2's careful reasoning can't always be engaged without significant effort. The result is not a condemnation of human rationality, but a nuanced picture of our mental strengths and vulnerabilities. Armed with these insights, you can approach decisions, especially those involving uncertainty or high stakes, with a bit more humility and a bit more caution. You can remain watchful for the illusions of correlation and overconfidence that so easily slip into your thinking. You can adopt small interventions, like working with algorithms or seeking external feedback, to reduce the impact of biases. And perhaps, most profoundly, you can accept that knowing is a process shaped by stories your mind tells. You can be gentler on yourself and others when those stories prove incomplete or misguided. In an era where misinformation abounds and complexity is ever growing, thinking fast and slow provides a roadmap for navigating the labyrinth of modern life with your eyes wide open, occasionally slowing down your fastest intuitions to let reason speak.